Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one, we are going to stick to Sweden and we're also going to stick to my home county of Skåne here in the very south of the country. We're going to return to a brewery that's featured on the channel many times before. I've had some really nice beers from these guys over the years, a few different styles, but I think it is most definitely fair to say that this brewery is best known for their different kinds of Imperial Stouts. Now, the beer we're going to have a look at today is among the strongest of beers that we've had from this brewery. It might well also be the most simple one in terms of the brew sheet. I haven't looked into that to confirm it 100%, but still. It is also supposed to be just very, very nice actually, and this brewery has never let us down before. So needless to say, I'm very curious to see what this one is going to have in store for us. We've been sitting on this bottle for maybe 2 or 3 months, something like that. So yeah, I think it is about time to crack it open. So as I say, curious to see what it's going to have in store for us. Hopefully it's another good beer. Hopefully it makes for an interesting review. And as always, I hope that you guys enjoy my take on this one as well. So yeah, for this review then, we are going to head to Arlöf, which is a little bit to the northeast of Malmö and a little bit to the southwest of me here in Lund, kind of in the middle. You always go past it when you're going on the train to Malmö from Lund here. But we're going to have a look at another beer from Nerd Brewing, who are of course part of the Molecule Brewing Collective. But this particular beer is called Increment. It comes in at 16% ABV, so as I said, it is a little bit of a monster, and they're describing this one as an Imperial Oatmeal Stout. Now, I think this beer was released as part of the Lokalt och Småskaligt assortment through Systembolaget for August of 2022, but I'm not 100% sure. It was released a couple of months ago and I've been sitting on the bottle, like I said. But yeah, like I say, very curious to see what it's going to have in store for us. Let's crack on with this one and see what we have. A 16% Imperial Oatmeal Stout from Nerd Brewing. You can't really go wrong there. But yeah, as always with my reviews then, I'll tell you a little bit about the brewery before we taste the beer. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. All the usual links are in the video description below. That's the brewery website, the link to my other reviews that I've done from Nerd Brewing before, and we will no doubt add more to that list in the near future. But there's all the usual social media down there. If you want to see more reviews, do please consider subscribing to the channel. The support you give is massively appreciated, and you can of course go into the channel homepage and search for beer based on the channel's geography-based tagging system. You know, county, city, province, prefecture, whatever it is, use that in the channel homepage. You will find beers from your local area. Hopefully, we'll be always adding to that, and you can of course check out the playlist of beers from different countries. You'll find this one in the Swedish playlist, and that is constantly being added to. But anyway, let's go on to my brewery notes and I'll tell you a little bit about Nerd Brewing then. So, Nerd Brewing, as I've mentioned to you before, find their roots in Malmö, and the company was founded by Hannes Gruber and Karen Carlson back in 2015 when they had their premiere at the Malmö Ale and Whiskey Festival. And these guys were both big beer enthusiasts who really just wanted to break into the industry. So Hannes had been a home brewer for a long time and he got very good feedback on his beers, and it was this that really spurred him on and inspired him to turn professional. He comes from a background in software development and takes care of the brewing side of things, whereas Karen was an entrepreneur and a trader within the IT industry. She managed the business side of the brewery, although she is no longer involved in the company. But it's Hannes's background in software development that means a number of these beers are named after different things in programming. Of course, that is the idea behind the open source beer slogan that these guys use. But basically, they started up with a very small production, very modest production, and they went on to become the top rated brewery in Sweden according to Untappd, and they have remained very high in the rankings ever since then. But the beers were originally produced at the Lilla Ölfabriken Chad beer facility in Rosengård in Malmö, and they also produced one or two beers at South Plains next door as well. But the company officially joined with Chad beer and Lilla Ölfabriken to form a collective, and they continue to brew their beers under their own brands. But Nerd Brewing of course mainly brew Imperial Stouts, but in the past they've also released a couple of IPAs. There have been barley wines as well, and a few other things that I haven't ever tried myself, but had a barley wine from these guys. Also had the Switch IPA that they did a few years ago, and they were both pretty damn awesome, I have to say. But in the early days, other than a few festivals around Sweden, it was actually very difficult to get a hold of the Nerd Brewing beers. But since 2018, they've been selling their beers through Systembolaget, so every month or two you will get a new Nerd Brewing beer through there, and they've just been kind of growing their brand ever since then. It's quite easy to get their beers in Denmark, and I believe that was where I actually got a hold of the Switch New England IPA can that I reviewed a wee while back. But in March of 2021, a new collective called Molecule was announced. This includes Elm 11, who of course are run by Anders, lovely guy. There's also Nerd Brewing in there and Chad Beer, and these guys have a new brewery in Arlöv, which starts off with a 1,500 litre brew kit. Over the last kind of year or so, they've been building up this facility. They now have a tap room in there, which they are hoping to open up every month. I went and visited it when it first opened. We'll see about doing a video there at some point in the future. But the Molecule Brewing Collective, when it comes to these beers, it is Anders from Elm 11 that's brewing the nerd things these days, but I think Hannes is designing the recipes. But he does take part in the brewing a little bit as well. But it's kind of interesting to see where these guys are going to go forward. So as it stands, when it comes to the Molecule Brewing Collective, the lagers and IPAs are being released under the Chad Beer brand. The Imperial Stouts and barley wines and things like that, the big malty beasts essentially, are being released under the Nerd Brewing brand, whereas Elm 11, which is Anders' brand, the brewer, he is doing mainly, the kind of modern, fruity, juicy Nordic sour beers. That's kind of how it's working. But as of October 2022, when I'm filming this review for you, under the Nerd Brewing beer brand, there have been 120 different kinds of beers. Like I said, mainly different kinds of Imperial Stouts, but there have been barley wines and a few IPAs back in the day. But yeah, they will be focusing on the big malty things going forward, I'm sure. But yeah, that is all I can really tell you about, Nerd Brewing for the moment. If you want to learn more about these guys, again, you can check out the brewery website. You can follow them on Facebook and Instagram to keep up to date with all the latest goings on. And you can, of course, check out the Rate Beer, Untappd and Beer Advocate pages to learn a little bit more about all the different beers that these guys have done. The other thing to point out, as I say, the slogan of Nerd Brewing is open source beer. So the idea that Hannes has is that pretty much every recipe he makes is put on the website, and he always says if there is one missing, email him, tell him, and he'll send it to you and then put it up on the website. That's kind of how it works. That's his programming background. But check out all those links as I mentioned. I think it is about time that we have a little look at this beer and see what we have. So as I said to you earlier, this one comes in at 16% ABV. They're describing it as an Imperial Oatmeal Stout, and this is a little bit simple compared to some of the other Nerd Brewing ones that we've had. You can see the lovely wax top on this. I did actually put a knife just round the line here so that we could open it up more easily during the video. But yeah, this is kind of typical artwork as to what with what you would expect from Nerd Brewing. There is their main symbol there. But the artwork we see on this is quite simple, is quite similar, I should say, to what we've seen from them before. But 330ml bottle. This one, I think I paid 80. I want to say 80 Swedish kronor for this. Maybe 100 actually, considering it's 16%, but 80 seems to ring a bell. 80 Swedish kronor is about €8, £7 sterling, $9 American. So you do get good value from these Nerd Brewing Stouts when you review them, when you buy them from Systembolaget, I should say. But let's get this guy out and we'll get on with the tasting then. I'm very curious to see what my strongest ever Nerd Brewing beer is going to be like. So we'll pour this, get it out into the glass and see what we have. I mean, just look at the pour on that. That is viscous as hell. Sugar the last little bit up. Put that in. But yeah, that is pretty damn impressive. 16% Imperial Stout. It's not often that you can say you can have a look at something that is this strong, of course. So, this looks pretty awesome. So you can see the head has faded away from this beer rather quickly. When it's such a high ABV, you would expect that, but there is a nice little ring just around the edge of the glass. I'll just let you guys have a little look at that on the camera there. You can see there's that nice little bit of kind of dark tan foam that is just kind of accumulated around the edge of the beer there, I should say. But you can see this beer has poured pretty much as you would expect from any Imperial Stout. You've got that lovely dark ebony rosewood colour. Remember, the colour of your beer depends on one, the type of malts that you use. This goes a long way to determining your EBC rating. Two, the length of your wort boil is also going to play a role, because the longer you boil the wort, the more the sugars caramelise, and thus you get a darker colour of beer. Any barrel aging you do or any adjuncts that you put in will affect the colour of the beer too, but when it comes to black beers like this, you know, it is pretty damn difficult to to do anything to change the colour of the beer because of the black malt or the special B or whatever happens to be in the backbone of this beer. If you shine the light through this one though, you do get a little bit of that more chestnutty colour to it, but that, you know, chestnutty Pepsi Max cola sort of thing. But definitely this one is pretty much black as night, I have to say. One or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, a few little ones coming up toward the surface of the beer, but yeah, the head on this beer has pretty much dissipated. So yeah, in terms of what you would expect appearance wise from an Imperial Stout, there really is nothing surprising about this beer, I have to say. Yeah, you can see that for yourself. One or two big bubbles sticking toward the side of the glass, and just, yeah, one or two little ones going up towards the surface of the beer there, but you know, it is pretty much what you would expect. Yeah, I think we can go on to the aroma now and just see what we have with this beer. Nothing particularly surprising about the appearance, particularly when you consider what style of beer this is. So let's go for it. Let's have a look at the aroma of this one then. Just going to shift that bottle there because I noticed it's not quite at the angle I would like. So, aroma wise, this is just a monster, and you would not expect anything less from a 16% nerd beer. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just an absolute monster. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful smelling beer. Straight away, it's just very, very rich. Lots of big brown sugars, lots of chocolate, good little bit of red fruit, just a little bit of hoppy character. I'm just curious to see what it says in the ingredients list in this one. It does just say malted barley and oats, and that kind of makes sense. You know, the oats are going to give you some of the kind of smoothness and creaminess in this beer, and of course when they're describing it as an oatmeal stout, it would make sense. So yeah, no adjuncts in this one. This is just going to be a big double or maybe even triple mash Imperial Stout. You can smell that big silkiness and smoothness right away in this beer. It is just it is pretty interesting. So yeah, it's lovely. It really is lovely, this beer. Yeah, gives you everything you'd want. Let's break this beer down though and describe the aroma for you a little bit more in depth, but you can smell that this is just an absolute monster, but beautiful, beautiful beer. So, backbone of the beer then. For me, this beer actually has a little bit of woodiness in the backbone. You can smell a little bit of that. It's not barrel aged, I will point that out and be very clear on that. This is not barrel aged, but yeah, it does have just a little bit of an almost woody backbone to it. You are of course getting little bits of nutty character in there, but yeah, because it's an oatmeal stout, it's very smooth and almost, you know, just kind of silky and slightly creamy in a way. So that's quite interesting too. But yeah, nice little bit of roasty toasty. There's a nice little bit of roasty toasty well-fired bread crust for sure, absolutely. But I'm getting quite a lot of kind of sweet rye bread out of this one. I always used to enjoy getting a little bit of rye bread over the weekend from the bakeries in Germany, and I miss that. I really do miss that one from when I lived in Heidelberg. But this beer, yeah, roasty toasty well-fired bread crust. I will point out that it's not too dry, but you've got that lovely kind of oily rye bready character on top of that. So yeah, definitely some of that in there. There's almost a little bit of a kind of, you know, muffiny, cakey, chocolate brownie sort of thing in this beer as well. And when it's so high in alcohol, 16%, you'd kind of expect that, to be honest. So yeah, well-fired bread crust, a little bit of a nutty and woody sort of thing in there. Some nice rye bread. And as I say, you've got that kind of chocolate cakey brownie sort of thing in there. Just going from the aroma of this beer, it's at least double mash. Maybe even triple mash. I wouldn't be surprised if it's triple mash. You know, Hannes might just say like, oh, let's try this and see what it does. I can see him doing that. But yeah, it's at least a double mash beer, this one. I'll also point out the brown sugars for me in this beer do not smell too leathery. So I don't think this has had an especially long wort boil. I know that Nerd Brewing like to use a long wort boil when it comes to their beers, but the brown sugary side of this beer does not come across as overly leathery compared to other things we've had from them before. But as I say, above that kind of cakey layer that this beer has, you start to get some of the chocolatey notes in this beer. So absolutely, there's a sort of 80% cocoa chocolate toward the, further back on the nose. But as you move further forward, you start to get some more kind of milky notes, and there is a little slight touch of vanilla in this beer. But as I say, you've got some nutty and kind of cakey elements in there as well. But there is definitely a lot of brown sugar and kind of treacle and molasses and things. But it doesn't smell too leathery yet. It is more of a kind of big oily treacle molasses type note. There is a little bit of a sweeter caramel in there as well for sure. Maybe tiny little hints of biscuit, but yeah, the brown sugary notes for me, very treacly, molasses-like as the Americans would say, sweet caramel, and yeah, it really is quite interesting. But the whole vibe of this beer, it really is just very big and silky and smooth, and we've had this before when it comes to oatmeal stouts. I don't know if I've had an oatmeal stout specifically from their brewing. I probably have, and I've just forgotten about it. I think we've reviewed maybe 20 odd beers from these guys at this point in time. But yeah, aroma wise, this one really is quite interesting from that perspective, to say the least. So yeah, it really has just this big, thick, creamy sort of thing at the same time. But yeah, you've got the big oily brown sugary notes in there, the kind of chocolatey notes, and then you've got all that bready and cakey character underneath. But it smells absolutely lovely. It doesn't strike me as being as complex as some of the Nerd Brewing beers we've had in the past, but it certainly has a lot, a fair amount of stuff going on actually. Yeah, really curious to see what this is going to taste like. When it comes to the hoppy side of things, there's not too much to report in that sense. You've got a little touch of earthiness. So like I say, yeah, a little touch of earthiness to this one. A little bit of floral character as well, a nice wee touch of grassiness. But yeah, when it's a 16% Imperial Stout, Imperial Stouts are not the most hop forward of beer styles anyway. This one I have had it sitting for 2 or 3 months in the bottle. You're just getting the kind of remnants, I should say, of the Imperial Stout in there. But when it comes to the fruity side of things, this beer is quite interesting. You've got a lovely little bit of kind of rich plum to this one, a bit of a pruny kind of character as well. I'm not getting the sharper raisin that you can get from this type of beer either, actually, but yeah, there are a few things going on in there. A little bit of, as I say, juicy plum, a little bit of prune. There is a little bit of that almost kind of phenolic, medicinal kind of thing going on in there as well. Definitely some juicy figs, a little bit of blackberry, a little bit of black currant. Yeah, it is quite nice. But as I say, there is just that little bit of, you get a little bit of this kind of datey, dried fruity, phenolic type thing just backing up this beer. So yeah, the way that this goes together, I think, is, really quite nice in that sense. It's like a kind of dry, fruity backbone, but then you've got all the kind of more oily characteristics sitting on top of it. Lovely smelling beer, this one. Really very, very nice. So I have to compliment Nerd Brewing on that. As I always say, you should always take a little bit of time to enjoy the aroma of the beer before you get stuck into it. That is always half the experience when it comes to craft beer and tasting different things. So definitely do that. But I think it's about time that we crack into this one. So yeah, this is the Increment, or is it Increments? Yeah, Increment, I should say. 16% Imperial Oatmeal Stout from Nerd Brewing in Arlöv, part of the Molecule Brewing Collective here in Skåne in the very south of Sweden. Let's get stuck into this one. Slange, skål, cheers. Oh yeah. I mean, straight away, you can feel that this beer is a big, boozy beast. This is just a monster. But as you would expect from their brewing, when it comes to this style, it is just very, very nice. And as always, I've always said this about Nerd Brewing beers, no matter what type of Imperial Stout they do, you always just get this little bit of roasty toastiness. These beers have always got just a little bit of that RIS, Russian Imperial Stout backbone. This one doesn't let you down there. You just get that, you take this beer in, it's a big, smooth, silky, boozy monster, but then in the aftertaste, just out comes that little bit of roasty, toasty, special B, I think it is, bitterness. And it lets you know, Russian Imperial Stout. But yeah, I have to compliment them on this. This, just on the first sip, we've only had one sip, this beer is pretty damn ridiculous in a very good way. So yeah, thumbs up to Hannes for this one. This is pretty damn awesome. And I will say, going from the taste of this beer, it is double or triple mash, and I wouldn't be surprised if it has had a long boil. You can't pick that up so much in the aroma, as we mentioned earlier, but yeah, this beer is pretty damn crazy. But we know Nerd Brewing, we know they do these big Imperial Stouts. You can't complain when they do something like this, but this beer is pretty good, so thumbs up to them. Always takes you a few sips to just kind of adjust your mouth and appreciate what's going on. But yeah, where do we start with this one then? Let's start in the middle third of your palate with the beer. So absolutely, backbone of the beer, you've got that nice roasty, toasty, well fired kind of bread crusty sort of thing with this one. Special, I'm pretty sure it's special B that Hannes likes to use in all of these beers. We have spoken about this before, but it was a couple of, maybe 2 years ago, something like that. But yeah, lovely roasty, toasty, special B, well-fired backbone in this one. That sits there. On top of that, you get this really thick, kind of like chocolate brownie, Swedish kladdkaka, chocolate cake. You do get that. That kind of sits above the roasty, toasty, well-fired backbone. You've got that big kind of cakey sort of thing in there, and then above that, in that layer, you get this nice kind of sweet rye bready sort of thing, and it's almost like a kind of boozy, brandy soaked rye bread almost. So you've got these 3 really thick layers just sitting there, and what I'm describing as kind of rye bread, that probably is a lot of the effect of the kind of oatmeal. But yeah, this beer, in the middle of your palate, there's a lot of layers, roasty, well-fired, kind of malty backbone. Toward the front of that middle third of your palate, incidentally, you will get a few woody and nutty kind of elements in there, so absolutely getting some of that. Then above that, as I say, the kind of thick, oily, chocolate brownie, kladdkaka type thing. Then you've got the kind of brandy soaked rye bread, but above that you start to get a more light, kind of sweet wholemeal type bread, and again it's very oily. I mean, the oatmeal in this beer is what's really going to make that middle third of your palate feel just very, very oily. But above these kind of 4 layers, that's when you start to get the sweeter side of the stout coming out. Absolutely. So yeah, above the kind of wholemeal brown bready layer, you can feel the chocolate elements to this beer. So at the back of that middle third of your palate, there's a sort of 80-90% cocoa chocolate sort of thing. Yeah, so you've got that nice 80-90% cocoa chocolate sort of thing going on. And then as you move further forward toward the front of that middle third of your palate, you can feel it just kind of mellows out. And it goes through that process where it's like, 60, 80, 70, 60, 50, maybe 40% cocoa chocolate. It does stay dark chocolate, it does have that kind of almost aromaticity and red fruity quality of dark chocolate. But yeah, you've definitely got a spectrum across the middle third of your palate, whereas the chocolate starts at 80, maybe 90% cocoa chocolate, and then as you move further forward, it maybe reaches about 50%. So you've got this lovely layer of dark chocolate that just brightens up a little bit the further forward that you go. But above all of that, the layer that's sitting above that's the brown sugars. You get that big treacly molasses kind of caramelly sort of thing, and the chocolate almost forms like a bowl for these brown sugars to sit in. So if you go to the dead center of your palate, you can feel that big, thick, highly caramelized treacle molasses sort of thing. And as you go out from the center of your palate, it just kind of mellows out a little bit, and you do get a little bit of a sweeter caramel toward the edge of your palate there. But you know, the whole brown sugary side of this beer is very, you know, treacly and molasses like. Interestingly, there is a little touch of a leathery character to it, but too it's not too forward in that way. And that to me indicates that it's not an overly long wort boil. We know that Nair Brewing like to leave the wort to kind of boil overnight and things. I've seen them do that in the brewery. They leave it for a good few hours. But yeah, it doesn't strike me as being overly leathery, although it does give you a little bit of that impression the further you go into the aftertaste. So yeah, it's really interesting how all this goes together. Yeah, it kind of strikes me as a little bit more of a kind of old meal, old meal, mixing my words up. It must be the 16% going to my head already. But yeah, it strikes me as a more kind of old school Imperial Stout, this one. This is a bit more kind of raw in some ways compared to what we've had from Nair Brewing in the past. But that middle third of your palate is where you're going to get the most complexity out of this beer. And it just goes together really quite well. So it gets a thumbs up from me, absolutely. And it's a very nice beer to drink, this one. It is, of course, a sipping beer. You're not going to go through this too quickly, but yeah, it is just really nicely done. So big thumbs up to Nair Brewing for this, absolutely. Love it. But yeah, I think that's covered everything we need to say about the middle third of the palate then. So back third of the palate, the border region between middle third and back third of your palate, again you get a little bit of that bready build up in there, and it's quite cakey and sort of clad khaki, and there's a wee bit of fruitiness and things in there. But yeah, the back third of your palate, roasty, toasty, well fired backbone. That of course is a little bit more bitter, because the further back you are on the palate, the more roasty and bitter flavours come out. The further forward you are, the sweeter flavours come out. You do get that kind of almost cakey kladkake type layer, which is a bit taller. Then you get the kind of oily rye bread and a bit of the wholemeal brown bread. These layers are all a little bit taller, but also a little bit less dense in a way. And above all of that, you do get some of the more kind of yeasty esters coming out of the beer, and it really is like a kind of, it's like a light brown bread almost, but with a kind of brandy soaked kind of thing. So the yeasty flavours you get in this beer are, yeah, like light wholemeal bread with a bit of a more brandy soaked type thing. So yeah, the way that this beer goes together in that sense is quite nice. So yeah, back third of the palate, you can feel the flavour is definitely taller. Then as you come further forward, it just kind of squashes together that wee bit more. So yeah, I do like how all that goes together in this beer, the malty side of this. And of course it is an Imperial Stout, it makes sense that we focus on the big malty side of it. It is just really nicely done. But to me, it is quite different from what we've had from Nair Brewing in the past. This 16% thing is it's pretty, in some ways it's pretty mind blowing, not just from the fact that it gets you pissed as fuck, but yeah, it is very, very nice. I think that's everything we need to say about the malty and yeasty side of this beer, although yeah, I think this is not going to be my most coherent review just because of the booze in the beer. But let's focus on the hoppy side of things then. Back corners of the palate, you've got a lovely little bit of earthiness there, and it's actually I'd be curious to know about the hop in this beer, because it is actually a fairly strong earthiness in a way, but that matches up with the kind of special bee backbone that Nair Brewing use. It always works. As you come further forward, there's a little bit of a herbal thing. As you reach the front corners of the palate, it's just a little touch floral, and then round the front curve of the tongue, it's a wee bit lighter and more grassy in a sense. So yeah, I do like how that goes together with this beer. Yeah, the green component in this one, it's not overly prominent, but you probably could age this beer for a good bit longer than I have, and those hoppy characteristics would drop out. But the hoppy side of the beer just gives it that little bit more kind of complexity, I guess we could say, and it works. So let's focus on the front third of the palate then. So, border region between front third and middle third of your palate, you get that nice big, you do, in that border region, you do get a little bit of that kind of build up there, and it is quite, chocolate brownie, chocolate muffin type thing. You do get that, and it's, soaked in brandy. You do get that big kind of booziness to it. The base of the front third of your palate, absolutely. Bit of brown bread, a little bit of a kind of brandy soaked bread, and then above that you get that nice oily bubble where the juicy fruity esters just roll their way out of the beer. So then we can focus on the fruity side of things, absolutely. So when you take the beer in, you do get just a little touch of that raisiny sharpness on top, but underneath that, quite quickly, you get kind of more oily plums, there's the drier pruniness in there, and then in the base of that back half of the front third of your palate, it is more kind of, it really is dates. You get a lot of that kind of datey dryness to the beer, but dry fruits, but as you move further forward, you start to get a little bit of a more figgy note, and as you move into the front half of the front third of your palate, it's got a lot more kind of, you get a little bit of a black currant and a black berry. You get a bit of a black currant in the base, then a big oily black berry on top of that. But the further you go into the aftertaste, it is the kind of datey, pruny, dry fruity type things that come out of this beer, and it really works very, very well in that way. But yeah, this one is pretty damn interesting. This is an absolute monster of a beer. I will admit I can feel the booze in this one going to my head. At 16%, I think I can be let away with that, to be honest. Yeah, it's a lovely, lovely beer, this one. Absolutely sipping beer. Obviously, I've drunk it a little bit faster than I might normally because we're doing a review. But yeah, the fruity side of this is very, very nice. And I think in the actual aroma, it was a little bit more kind of rounded and red fruity, but yeah, you get a lot more dry fruit out of this one, particularly because of the alcohol content when you actually taste it. But nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. So yeah, as I always say, just enjoy that, really enjoy it. But I think we've said everything we really need to about the flavour of this beer, so we can go on to the mouthfeel. So on that note, there is no doubt in my mind that this is top end of full bodied in this one. This is potentially one of the thickest beers that I've come across. Doesn't surprise me when I consider the brewery and the alcohol content that this beer is, but it's got a big, thick, oily, sort of silky mouthfeel. Creamy is not the right word for this one, as I say, big, thick and oily and silky. IBU wise, this beer does carry a fair bit of IBU. It has to be about 60 or 70 IBUs, but the sweetness kind of suppresses a little bit of that with this beer. As I say, big. The malt base has got a bit of roastiness, big, kind of thick, oily, sweetness, silky kind of character in there as well. And you've also got those, the big oily fruity notes out of this too. Yeah, it is just a big, thick, oily thing, this beer, but as I say, it's absolutely lovely. So yeah, if you get to try this one, I think you are going to enjoy it. This is going to be my night ending beer for sure. This is just going to be a sipper for the rest of the evening to watch a film with. But yeah, if you get this beer, share it with somebody, because otherwise it's going to fuck your day in the best way, absolutely. But in terms of what we've had from their brewing before, I think this is very, very well done. So yeah, to be honest, I think that is a very good point to leave this beer. I can really feel this one going to my head now at 16%, so that's understandable. But yeah, beautiful, beautiful beer from Nair Brewing once again. As I say, this is one of the ones where they've kind of shown that sometimes simple can be better, but I should have had a little look at the recipe of this before we did the video to see what they've done. But yeah, this has got to be, double or maybe triple mash that they've done with this beer. So Hannes has pulled off a very, very nice beer here. It is pretty awesome. So I think we can leave it at that. Yeah, this one is the Increment 16% Imperial Oatmeal Stout from Nair Brewing, based in Arlöv, just outside of Malmö here in Skåne in the south of Sweden. An absolute monster, and I've really enjoyed reviewing this one for you. So once again, thank you for watching my beer reviews. Until the next time, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Let me know your own thoughts on this beer in the comment section below. Let me know what your favourite beers are from Nair Brewing as well, and we will no doubt return to these guys at some point in the near future. But in the meantime, Slange, Scott, cheers, and I'll catch you guys very soon. Check out Nair Brewing, they're awesome. This beer, this is one of the booziest things I've done. Cheers.